A dense rainforest is a deceptively difficult place to build a civilization. For centuries, we believed these landscapes were untouched wilderness, too harsh for grand cities to ever take root. Yet beneath the canopy, societies like the Maya and the Khmer performed an astonishing feat of engineering. They did not just survive in the world's most competitive biome, they engineered it into thriving, sustainable urban centers that lasted for generations. By the end of this investigation, you will understand the lost blueprint for building cities in harmony with the most demanding environments on Earth. We will uncover how they turned flooding jungles into reservoirs of plenty and what their forgotten wisdom means for our own future. What if the greatest urban planners in history are not who we think they are? The rainforest floor is a world of shadows and fierce competition. To the untrained eye, it is a green paradise, an explosion of life, but for a farmer or an engineer, it presents a brutal paradox. The soil beneath all that vibrant growth is surprisingly thin and fragile. In a temperate forest, leaves fall, decompose slowly, and build up a rich, dark layer of humus over centuries. In the tropics, that process happens at blinding speed. Heat and constant moisture cause organic matter to break down almost immediately, and the intense rains wash those precious nutrients away before roots can absorb them. What looks like abundance is actually a nutrient desert disguised by a temporary green curtain. This is the foundational challenge. A civilization cannot be built on fleeting fertility. The traditional method of slash-and-burn agriculture, where a patch of forest is cleared, farmed for a few years until the soil is exhausted, and then abandoned, works for small, mobile groups. But it fails catastrophically at the scale required for a city. You cannot feed thousands of artisans, priests, and laborers, or marshal the workforce to raise stone temples, if your entire food supply has to pick up and move every 3 years. So the question becomes not just how they built here, but how they could possibly feed the builders. The sheer presence of massive cities like Tikal or Angkor in these landscapes defies the basic logic of their environment. It is as if we found a glittering metropolis built in the middle of a desert with no visible source of water. The existence of the city itself is the first clue that its creators saw the landscape not as a barrier, but as a system to be rewired. They had to solve the rainforest paradox, and their solution began by looking down, not up, engineering the very ground beneath their feet. Their solution required a complete reimagining of what a city even is. We must abandon the image of a dense, walled metropolis, a compact fortress of stone separated from the countryside. In the rainforest, that model was not just impractical, it was a recipe for ecological collapse. Instead, tropical civilizations pioneered a form of urbanism so integrated with the land that the boundary between city and garden blurred into irrelevance. Think of it not as a city in the jungle, but the jungle engineered into a city. The Maya, for instance, rarely built the packed, towering urban cores we associate with ancient Rome or medieval Europe. Their centers like Tikal or Calakmul were ceremonial and administrative hearts surrounded by vast, sprawling hinterlands. These were not empty wilds but carefully managed landscapes. Families lived in dispersed household clusters across raised terrains, each surrounded by its own productive orchard, medicinal garden, and field. The city was a network, a constellation of small clearings connected by causeways, with wetlands known as bajos at its functional core. These seasonally flooded lowlands were not wastelands to be drained, but the engine of the system. They were transformed into complex, managed wetlands for agriculture, water storage, and aquaculture. The urban footprint was light, distributed, and designed to work with the forest's rhythms, not against them. Similarly, Angkor was not a single, dense-walled entity. It was a vast, low-density metropolis of reservoirs, canals, and temple complexes scattered across hundreds of square miles. A resident might live in a wooden house on stilts near a communal pond, with rice fields and palm groves right outside their door, all connected by a web of waterways to the grandeur of Angkor Wat miles away. The city was the landscape itself, meticulously sculpted. This garden city model turned a weakness into a strength. By spreading out, they reduced pressure on any single point of the fragile ecosystem. By integrating food production into the urban fabric, they shortened supply lines and built resilience. This was urban planning as a form of symbiotic gardening, a lesson in living within a system rather than attempting to dominate it. The stone pyramids and temples we marvel at today were merely the glittering nodes in this vast, living and breathing network. But a garden city, no matter how beautifully conceived, withers without one essential element. Water is the lifeblood of any civilization, and in the rainforest it presents a paradox of extremes. For months, the skies open, delivering torrents that can flood fields, wash away topsoil, and turn pathways into rivers of mud. Then the rains cease. A punishing dry season descends, where the same land that was drowning just weeks earlier now cracks with thirst. This cycle of deluge and drought is the ultimate test of an engineer. To build a lasting society here, you could not simply react to the weather. You had to become its master. The true genius of these civilizations was not in building on the landscape, but in rebuilding it into a colossal, continent-scale machine for managing water. They engineered artificial landscapes with a single, elegant purpose: to capture the fury of the monsoon, store its bounty, and distribute its gift with precision throughout the year. This hydrological mastery was not an added feature. It was the very foundation upon which every temple, every farm, and every home was built. Without it, the stone would have no purpose, and the people would have no future. Their first and most monumental task was to tame the flood. In places like Angkor, this meant thinking on a staggering scale. They constructed vast reservoirs called Barays, some stretching over 5 miles long and more than a mile wide. These were not natural lakes, but meticulously excavated and embanked engineering marvels. Canals, some as wide as modern highways, channeled water from rivers and seasonal runoff into these giant holding tanks. Think of the entire city and its hinterland as a bathtub with a sophisticated plumbing system. The goal was to slow the water down, to prevent it from raging uselessly to the sea, and instead persuade it to linger. This captured water served multiple, interconnected roles. During the dry season, it was released through smaller channels and canals to irrigate rice paddies, ensuring a stable food supply even when the skies were barren. It replenished the community ponds or trepangs that served as neighborhood water sources. It created a network of navigable waterways for transport and trade, turning a challenge of terrain into an advantage of connectivity. But perhaps most importantly, this managed water cycle recharged the groundwater and created a stable, humid microclimate. It was a buffer against disaster, a savings account of liquid survival. The temples and palaces we see today were the pinnacle of this system, but they rested literally and figuratively on this unseen, watery foundation. Every stone was laid with the confidence that the water would come, be stored, and flow where it was needed. This was the first and most critical act of faith for a rainforest civilization, the belief that through ingenuity, they could rewrite the rules of their environment, turning a volatile cycle of scarcity and excess into a rhythm of reliable abundance. The scale of this ambition is almost incomprehensible from the ground. To truly grasp it, you would need to see the landscape from above. From that vantage point, the city of Angkor reveals itself not as a collection of buildings, but as a geometric masterpiece of water. Its most striking features are the immense rectangular barays, so vast and precise they look like lakes drawn by a draftsman. The largest of these, the West Baray, stretches over 5 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, holding an estimated 50 million cubic meters of water. Its construction was a feat of social organization that rivals the building of the pyramids. Thousands of workers would have moved millions of cubic meters of earth, not with machinery, but with baskets, creating embankments that still stand defiantly straight after 1,000 monsoons. This was not a dammed valley. It was a giant, artificial basin excavated from the earth, a deliberate and monumental act of creation. Its primary function was brutally practical, to capture the violent, silt-laden runoff from the Kulin Hills during the wet season, settle the sediment, and store a clean, life-giving reserve for the long, rainless months. Canals and gates allowed this water to be released with careful control, feeding a fractal network of smaller channels that reached the rice paddies sustaining the population. It was the ultimate insurance policy against drought, a guarantee that the kingdom would not starve. The Maya, facing similar seasonal extremes, engineered their own solutions. In the elevated heart of cities like Tikal, they constructed aguadas, large, plaster-lined reservoirs carved into the limestone bedrock. These were not casual ponds, but meticulously engineered systems. Catchment areas on paved plazas and temple roofs would funnel rainwater into these central tanks, which were often lined with clay to prevent seepage. The water was then managed, a precious commodity in a landscape with no major rivers. The scale was different from Angkor, but the principle was identical: capture the deluge, conserve it, and distribute it with intention. Yet to see these structures as merely utilitarian is to miss a deeper layer of their design. The perfect symmetry, the alignment with cardinal directions, the sheer, awe-inspiring presence of these human-made seas points to a dual purpose. They were as much about cosmology as they were about hydrology. The Baray was not just a reservoir, it was a symbolic ocean, a recreation of the mythical sea from which the world was born. The Temple Mountain at its center, like the West Meben, represented the cosmic mountain rising from the primordial waters. The Maya Aguada was not just a water tank, it was a portal to the underworld, a place where the sacred Chak, the rain god, could be petitioned. The water they held was life itself, and by controlling it so completely, the rulers were performing a divine duty, demonstrating their role as intermediaries between the people and the forces of nature. The engineering was an act of faith, and the faith justified the monumental scale of the engineering. This fusion of the practical and the profound is what made these systems so resilient, so central to the identity of the civilization itself. Yet this grand vision of captured water was useless if it remained locked in a central reservoir. The real magic happened in the arteries, the intricate networks of canals and channels that transformed a static body of water into a dynamic, flowing system. Picture the main Baray not as a lake but as a beating heart. From it, a vast circulatory system of canals, some as wide as rivers, others as narrow as garden streams, pulsed outward across the landscape. These were not random ditches. They were carefully surveyed, engineered with precise gradients to maintain a gentle, consistent flow without eroding their own banks. Their primary function was irrigation, delivering life to the rice paddies that fed the empire. A single main canal could branch into dozens of smaller channels, then into hundreds of field ditches, creating a fractal pattern of hydration that reached every corner of the cultivated plain. This was agricultural precision on a scale the ancient world rarely achieved, allowing for multiple rice harvests per year and supporting a population density that rivaled modern cities. But the canals did far more than water crops. They were the city's first line of defense against the monsoon's destructive power. During the heaviest rains, this network acted as a relief valve, strategically diverting floodwaters away from residential areas and temple foundations. channeling the excess back into storage basins or safely out to the Tonle Sap Lake. By giving the water a designated path, they prevented catastrophic erosion and the chaotic, landscape-scouring runoff that would have otherwise followed every storm. In doing so, they transformed water from a capricious threat into a disciplined, predictable resource, and this created a third, unexpected benefit: mobility. These canals became navigable highways. A farmer could paddle his harvest to a central market. Construction materials like sandstone blocks, too heavy for long overland transport, could be floated on barges directly to a temple site. Priests, officials, and traders could move across the city with an ease impossible on muddy jungle paths. The canals connected neighborhoods, economic zones, and ceremonial centers into a single, fluid organism. The city did not just have a water system, it lived on one, its daily rhythms synchronized to the gentle flow through its man-made veins. This integration turned a logistical nightmare into a seamless advantage, proving that in the rainforest, the most powerful infrastructure was not a wall or a road, but a thoughtfully designed current. But capturing and distributing water is only half the battle. The other half is building a foundation that can hold it without drowning the very crops it is meant to nourish. In the low-lying, seasonally flooded plains where these civilizations often settled, the ground could be a soupy, waterlogged mire for months on end. Plant roots, like those of the staple crops they depended on, simply rot in such saturated soil. To solve this, the ancient engineers performed a kind of alchemy, turning the problem itself into the solution. They did not drain these wetlands away, they built upwards from within them, creating artificial islands of fertility known as raised fields. This was agriculture reimagined as architecture. In the Maya world, particularly in places like the swampy bojos around cities like El Mirador or Edzna, they constructed extensive networks of these fields. Workers would dredge up nutrient-rich muck from the swamp bottom and pile it into long, rectangular mounds, often reinforced with woven baskets or wooden retainers. These mounds were separated by canals of that same dredged material. The result was a checkerboard landscape of elevated planting beds surrounded by water. The genius of this system is its elegant simplicity. The canals provided constant moisture to the roots of crops like maize, beans, and squash through capillary action, eliminating the need for strenuous irrigation. During the rainy season, the canals acted as drainage ditches, preventing the plant roots from waterlogging. The exposed muck in the canals, warmed by the sun, would foster the growth of aquatic plants and algae, which could be periodically scooped up and added to the raised beds as a continuous, natural fertilizer. This created a self-renewing cycle of fertility, a closed-loop system that could produce harvests year after year without fallowing. It turned a marginal, unusable swamp into the most productive farmland in the region. Across the world in Angkor, a similar principle was at work on a different canvas. Around the edges of community ponds, the trepangs, and along the vast irrigation canals, farmers developed intricate gardens of raised beds. Here, the constant availability of managed water allowed for something extraordinary: the cultivation of floating rice. As the floodwaters rose in the wet season, farmers would transplant rice seedlings into these prepared beds. The rice plants would then grow at a rate that kept pace with the rising water, their stems elongating, sometimes reaching over 10 feet in length. This meant the Khmer could cultivate in areas that were deeply flooded, turning a period of potential agricultural disaster into one of maximum productivity. The raised beds provided a stable base for the young plants and improved soil aeration, leading to stronger root systems and higher yields. This was not just farming, it was a dynamic dance with the hydrological cycle, a partnership where human intention guided natural force. These elevated fields represent perhaps the purest expression of the rainforest engineers' philosophy. They did not fight the water, they invited it in, then built a stage upon which life could thrive above its reach. Every basket of soil, every woven retaining wall was a statement of confidence, a belief that with the right design, even the most challenging environment could be persuaded to bloom. This mastery of water and soil created the stage, but the true genius of these civilizations was in how they populated it. Beyond the canals and raised fields, they cultivated an entire forest. This was not the wild, untamed jungle of myth, but a carefully curated, living supermarket known as agroforestry. Imagine walking through the outskirts of an ancient Maya city. You would not see endless, monotonous fields of a single crop. Instead, you would move through a layered, green tapestry that mimicked the natural forest itself. Towering canopy trees like the majestic ceiba, sacred and symbolic, provided shade. Beneath them grew fruit trees, avocado, sapodilla for its chicle, and cacao, the source of chocolate. At shoulder height, you might find shrubs like the spiny ramon, whose nutritious nuts could be ground into flour. At ground level, vines like vanilla orchids would climb, while medicinal herbs and root vegetables filled the spaces in between. This was not a random collection of plants. It was a deliberate, multi-story garden designed by generations of knowledge. Each species was chosen for a purpose: food, medicine, construction material, or ritual use, and planted in a symbiotic relationship with its neighbors. The canopy trees protected the understory from harsh sun and torrential rain, their fallen leaves creating a natural mulch that conserved moisture and enriched the soil. This system provided a continuous, year-round harvest. While a maize field gives 1 or 2 yields a year, a food forest is always producing something, a fruit coming into season here, nuts ready for gathering there. It offered incredible dietary diversity and nutritional security, a buffer against the failure of any single annual crop. For the Khmer, the coconut and sugar palm were pillars of this living economy. A single sugar palm could be tapped for years for its sweet sap, which could be drunk fresh, fermented, or boiled down into sugar. Its wood was used for construction, its leaves for thatch and weaving. Every part of the tree served a function, and these trees were integrated into household plots, temple grounds, and the spaces between rice paddies. This practice reduced pressure on the wild forest for resources. Why venture deep into the jungle for timber or medicine when you had cultivated a sustainable source right at your doorstep? It created a resilient, low-maintenance production system that worked with ecological processes rather than replacing them. The agroforestry garden was more than just a clever farming technique. It was a philosophy of abundance rooted in deep observation. It understood that the greatest strength of the rainforest was not in any one species, but in the complex, interconnected relationships between them. By replicating that structure, they built a larder that was as enduring and self-renewing as the forest itself. This deep, symbiotic relationship with the forest leads us to one of the most astonishing and enduring mysteries in all of archaeology. In the heart of the Amazon, a place long believed to be a pristine wilderness incapable of supporting large-scale societies, researchers have uncovered something that rewrites the story of human ingenuity. Scattered across the basin, often near ancient riverbanks, are patches of soil so dark, so rich, and so fertile that they stand out starkly from the surrounding, thin, reddish earth. The locals call it Terra, Preta, Portuguese for black earth. This is not a natural geological formation. It is a human-made artifact, a testament to a lost science of soil creation. While civilizations like the Maya and Khmer were engineering water and gardens, unknown cultures in the Amazon were performing a different kind of alchemy. They were engineering the very ground beneath their feet, transforming one of the planet's most nutrient-poor soils into a self-renewing breadbasket. The composition of Terra Preta reveals its artificial origins. It is a dense, black mixture teeming with life. Laboratory analysis shows it is packed with charcoal from slow-burning fires, countless fragments of broken pottery, composted food waste like fish bones and turtle shells, and decomposed plant matter. This was not a garbage dump but a carefully crafted recipe. The charcoal or biochar is the star ingredient. It is incredibly porous, acting like a microscopic coral reef within the soil. This structure provides a perfect, permanent home for beneficial bacteria and fungi, the unsung heroes of fertility. It also acts as a sponge, holding onto water and nutrients that would otherwise be washed away by the relentless tropical rains. The pottery shards further improve drainage and aeration, preventing the soil from becoming compacted. The result is a living, breathing, and incredibly resilient ecosystem in a bag of dirt. The debate among scientists is whether this was a deliberate act of soil science or a fortunate byproduct of long-term human habitation. Some argue that the sheer volume and specific mixture suggest intention, a cultural technology passed down through generations. Others propose it accumulated gradually from daily life, from cooking fires, broken pots, and discarded organic waste piling up in midden heaps over centuries. Regardless of intent, the outcome was revolutionary. Unlike the thin jungle soil that exhausts itself in a few growing seasons, Terra Preta maintains its phenomenal fertility for centuries, even millennia. Farmers today still seek it out to enrich their fields, and experiments show crops grown in it can be 2 to 3 times more productive. This engineered earth did not just support a village. It could have sustained the large, settled populations that oral histories and emerging archaeology now suggest flourished along the Amazon's banks. The existence of Terra Preta forces us to reconsider the entire Amazon. What if it was not an untouched wilderness, but a managed, anthropogenic landscape, a vast garden built upon islands of human-made fertility? These dark earth patches are more than just soil. They are the fingerprints of a civilization that understood how to build longevity into the land itself, creating a legacy so potent it still feeds the forest today. All this engineered abundance of water, soil, and forest ultimately served a purpose: to create spaces where people could live, work, and connect with the divine. The physical cities themselves, the temples, plazas, and homes, were the final expression of this profound environmental partnership. Their construction reveals a philosophy of building that was resource-smart, climate-responsive, and deeply symbolic. They did not import foreign materials or impose alien designs. Instead, they worked with what the land provided, turning local limitations into architectural virtues. For the Maya, the foundation of their world was limestone. The entire Yucatan Peninsula is a vast slab of it, formed from ancient coral reefs. This stone was both a challenge and a gift. It is relatively soft when first quarried, allowing it to be shaped with stone tools, but it hardens upon exposure to air. Maya builders became masters of this material. They quarried it in blocks, using wooden wedges and water to fracture the bedrock, then transported it, likely on rollers and sledges, to construction sites. The resulting architecture, from the towering pyramids of Tikal to the elegant palaces of Palenque, is a symphony in stone, but they did not simply pile it high. Their designs were direct responses to the climate. Steep, soaring roof combs on temples were not merely decorative. They acted as lightning rods and helped heavy tropical rains sheet off quickly, protecting the fragile limestone mortar beneath. Plazas were paved and subtly sloped to channel runoff into reservoirs. Buildings were often arranged in open layouts with wide doorways and interior courtyards to maximize airflow, a natural form of air conditioning in the humid, still air of the rainforest. This was architecture that breathed. In Southeast Asia, the Khmer faced a different geological palette. Their early structures relied on laterite, a reddish, iron-rich clay that hardens into a rock-like consistency when exposed to air. It was easy to cut into blocks from moist pits but became incredibly durable, forming the core of temple mounds and city walls. For their most sacred and prestigious buildings, however, they turned to sandstone. Quarrying this beautiful stone from the Kulin Hills, they floated the massive blocks down rivers and canals during the flood season, a logistical marvel. Sandstone allowed for the exquisite, narrative bas-reliefs that adorn Angkor Wat, telling stories of gods and kings. Khmer architectural adaptations were equally astute. Their iconic temple towers, shaped like lotus buds, featured incredibly steep stairways and cascading tiers. This design wasn't just symbolic of mountains, it was functional, shedding monsoon rains with dramatic efficiency. Roofs extended far beyond walls to create shaded verandas, protecting delicate carvings from direct sun and driving rain. Perhaps most famously, the entire city of Angkor Thom was laid out as a perfect square, with gates aligned to the cardinal directions and a central temple mountain, Bayon, at its heart. This alignment was cosmological, yes, but it also organized space, managed water flow through symmetrical moats, and created a predictable, harmonious urban environment. In both civilizations, orientation was a science. Structures were frequently aligned with the solstices or the path of Venus, creating celestial events where sunlight would pierce a doorway to illuminate an inner sanctuary on a specific day. This wasn't just astronomy, it was a way of weaving the cycles of the cosmos into the daily fabric of the city, a constant reminder that the built world and the natural world were one interconnected system. The stones they chose and the shapes they carved were a direct dialogue with their environment, a testament to the idea that true sustainability begins by listening to the whispers of the place you call home. The true purpose of the Temple Mountain may lie far beyond its stone facade. To see these pyramids only as places of worship is to miss their deeper function within the engineered landscape. They were not isolated monuments but active, ecological engines. At Angkor, temples like Angkor Wat and the Bayon were deliberately placed at the center of immense water systems. The temple itself, often built on a raised mound, functioned as a symbolic mountain. The surrounding moat, a vast geometric expanse of water, was a symbolic ocean. This pairing was a cosmological model, yes, but it was also a working hydrological machine. The moat was a massive catchment basin and settling tank. During the monsoon, it would fill, its still waters allowing silt to settle out before the cleaner water seeped into the groundwater table or was channeled into the city's network. The temple mound, constructed with permeable laterite and sandstone, acted like a giant sponge, drawing that water upward through capillary action. This constant evaporation from the vast stone surfaces, combined with the evaporation from the moat, would have created a localized microclimate, a pocket of cooler, more humid air around the temple complex even during the dry season. This wasn't an accident, it was designed with ecological consequence. It stabilized the ground, prevented the temple foundations from shifting, and created a more temperate environment for the trees and gardens that were integral to the temple grounds. The Maya temple pyramids operated on a similar, if more intimate, scale. Built atop natural limestone hills or massive platforms, they were the highest points in the city. Their plastered surfaces and paved plazas were designed as rainwater catchment systems. Every downpour would be funneled through gravity-fed channels into the central reservoirs, or aguadas, below. The pyramid was the crown of the watershed, a command center for liquid resources. By concentrating water at these central nodes, they created oases of fertility. The areas immediately surrounding temples were often lush with cultivated groves, medicinal plants, and sacred trees sustained by this managed runoff. This transformed the temple from a passive symbol into an active participant in the city's survival. It became a life-giving landmark, a constant, visual reminder that spiritual authority and the practical stewardship of water were one and the same duty. The ruler who commissioned the temple was not just building a stairway to the gods, he was anchoring the entire local ecosystem, ensuring that from this sacred high point, the gift of water would flow down to nourish every level of society. The Temple Mountain was therefore the ultimate fusion of myth and mechanics, a belief made stone that quite literally made the environment around it more alive. The alignment of their world with the heavens was not merely symbolic. It was a precise, practical science that shaped the very streets and waterways of their cities. For the Maya, the cosmos was a clock, and their urban planners were its timekeepers. They observed the cyclical dance of celestial bodies with astonishing accuracy, charting the movements of the sun, moon, and particularly the planet Venus over generations. This was not abstract astronomy. This data became the blueprint for their cities, etched directly into the landscape. At sites like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, entire ceremonial complexes were designed as celestial observatories. The most famous example is El Castillo, the pyramid at Chichen Itza. Its 4 stairways each have 91 steps, which, combined with a shared platform at the top, total 365, the number of days in the solar year. But the true magic happens during the equinoxes. As the sun sets on those 2 days each year, the angle of the light casts a shadow along the northern stairway that creates the undulating illusion of a serpent slithering down from the temple to the earth. This was a public, city-wide spectacle that marked a critical turning point in the agricultural calendar, signaling the time to prepare for planting or harvest. The causeways or sakbiob that connected city centers to outlying settlements were often laid out with deliberate astronomical orientations. A causeway might point directly to the rising point of Venus on a specific, significant day in its 584-day cycle, a cycle the Maya associated with war and rain. By walking this road on that morning, a priest or ruler was physically tracing a path written in the stars, aligning the community's movements with cosmic forces believed to govern rainfall and fertility. This celestial urban planning created a living calendar made of stone and earth. It told people not just what time it was, but what to do. When the shadow of the serpent appeared, it was time for a specific ceremony. When Venus rose over the end of the sacred causeway, it might signal the time for ritual or the scheduling of military campaigns tied to the rainy season. The city itself became a giant timepiece, its architecture harmonizing human activity with the reliable rhythms of the universe. This integration ensured that agricultural life, religious ceremony, and civic authority were all synchronized to the same cosmic beat, creating a profound sense of order and predictability in an otherwise unpredictable rainforest environment. Stone and water alone could not build these cities. The true, invisible infrastructure was the society itself, the intricate web of knowledge, belief, and organization that translated a grand vision into a lived reality. To move millions of tons of earth for a reservoir, to quarry and float a mountain of sandstone, to maintain a canal network for centuries, required more than engineering genius. It required a social engine powerful enough to coordinate thousands of lives toward a common, long-term goal. Historians often see 2 primary models at work here: centralized authority and decentralized community, and the most successful civilizations likely blended both in a delicate balance. At one end of the spectrum, we see the undeniable force of a god-king. In Angkor, the construction of the West Baray or the Temple of Angkor Wat was an act of royal will, a demonstration of the king's divine mandate to order the cosmos. Such projects required a centralized state capable of marshalling a vast labor force, perhaps through a system of corvée labor, where subjects contributed a portion of their year to public works as a form of tax or religious duty. This state organized the specialists, the quarry masters, the canal surveyors, the barge captains, and the provisioners who fed the workforce. It provided the overarching plan and the authority to see it through across generations. This top-down model could achieve breathtaking scale and speed, creating the monumental icons that defined the civilization's power. Yet, if this authority grew too extractive or lost its connection to the people's welfare, it could become a vulnerability, a single point of failure for the entire system. A more resilient and often overlooked layer of infrastructure operated at the community level. The maintenance of a neighborhood pond, the daily care of a family's raised fields and food forest, the local management of a minor irrigation canal, these tasks fell to the people who depended on them directly. This was decentralized, practical knowledge passed down through families, a deep understanding of microclimates, soil types, and water flow that no central planner could ever fully dictate. The sustainability of the entire system relied on this grassroots participation. A king could command a great canal to be dug, but it was the local farmers who kept its smaller channels clear of silt, who negotiated water shares with their neighbors, and who adapted the grand design to the quirks of their own land. This created a powerful check and balance. The central authority provided the visionary framework and mobilized resources for mega projects that benefited all, while local communities managed the day-to-day stewardship, ensuring the system's adaptability and longevity. The knowledge itself was a form of sacred capital. It was encoded in rituals that marked the opening of the sluice gates, in myths that explained the origin of water, and in the very layout of household gardens that mimicked the forest. This was a civilization's living library, not stored on tablets, but practiced in the fields and recited in ceremonies, ensuring that the wisdom of how to live with the rainforest was woven into the fabric of daily life for every citizen, from the farmer to the king. The grandest reservoir and the most elegant canal are only as good as the knowledge that guides them. Behind every stone laid and every seed planted was an invisible framework, a deep and living library of understanding passed from one generation to the next. This was not a written manual of engineering principles, but an epistemology of the forest, a way of knowing born from millennia of patient, intimate observation. The true blueprint for these cities was not etched on parchment, but in the collective memory of the people, a refined intelligence about how their specific corner of the world worked. They learned to read the landscape like a text. The subtle greening of a particular tree signaled the imminent arrival of rains. The behavior of certain birds or insects could indicate changes in water levels or the coming dry season. The flowering cycle of a vine marked the perfect time to plant maize. They understood the properties of hundreds, perhaps thousands of plants, which roots could treat fever, which barks yielded strong cordage, which leaves repelled insects, and which fruits could be stored through seasons of scarcity. This was a granular, place-based science. It allowed them to predict the mood of the river, to anticipate the shift in winds, and to recognize the early signs of soil exhaustion before it became a crisis. This knowledge was encoded not in textbooks but in practices, in stories, and in the very structure of daily life. A child learned by doing, by helping to repair a raised field, by gathering specific herbs with a grandparent, by listening to myths where the rain god Chok or the Naga serpent of the waters were characters in a drama that explained the origin of springs and the necessity of respect. Rituals reinforced this practical wisdom. The ceremony to open the irrigation sluice gates at the start of the growing season was both a spiritual appeal and a technical rehearsal, ensuring everyone knew their role in the vital distribution of water. Planting songs held within their rhythms the ideal lunar phase and soil moisture level for sowing. This intergenerational transfer created a resilient feedback loop. A failed experiment in crop placement or water management became a lesson for the next generation, a refinement of the collective blueprint. Over centuries, this process of observation, application, and cultural transmission yielded a sophistication that we are only now beginning to decode with our satellites and soil cores. Their cities were not imposed upon the jungle, they were a conversation with it, a dialogue sustained by a profound and hard-won literacy of place. This deep knowledge was the ultimate renewable resource, the intellectual capital that made every other form of engineering possible. Even the most brilliant system has a breaking point. For all their hydrological genius and ecological wisdom, the great cities of the classic Maya did not last forever. Between the 8th and 9th centuries, many of the powerful city-states in the southern lowlands, places like Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan, experienced a profound decline. Their monumental construction ceased, populations dwindled, and royal dynasties fell silent. This period is often shrouded in romantic mystery, described as a sudden disappearance. But viewed through the lens of their own engineering, a different, more sobering narrative emerges. This was likely not a vanishing act, but a systems failure, a catastrophic unraveling of the delicate balance they had so carefully maintained. The evidence suggests a perfect storm of pressures that overwhelmed their capacity to adapt. Decades of meticulous research, including analysis of lakebed sediments and stalagmite layers in caves, now point to a series of severe, multi-generational droughts. These were not mere dry spells, but profound climatic shifts that stretched for 20, 30, or even 50 years. For a civilization built on the precise capture and storage of seasonal rainwater, this was an existential threat. Their magnificent reservoirs, the very hearts of their cities, began to fail. Without consistent replenishment, water levels dropped, exposing the plaster linings to cracking sun. The still, shrinking water became stagnant, a breeding ground for illness. Simultaneously, the political and social fabric that maintained the system began to fray. Warfare between rival city-states intensified, perhaps driven by competition over dwindling resources. The intricate networks of trade and alliance that distributed goods and knowledge fractured. This political fragmentation meant that a coordinated, region-wide response to the crisis became impossible. Each city-state was left to face the drought alone, its fate sealed by the limits of its own local reservoirs. Compounding this was the sheer success of their earlier innovations. Centuries of reliable food and water had supported population growth, pushing their engineered landscapes closer to their carrying capacity. There was less margin for error. When the rains failed year after year, the strain on the centralized systems of water distribution and food storage became intolerable. The evidence is etched in the earth itself. Archaeologists studying the great reservoir at Tikal have found layers of thick silt at the bottom, sediment that accumulated faster than it could be cleared. This siltation reduced the reservoir's capacity just when they needed every drop the most. The maintenance of these systems required a massive, organized labor force, a society unified in purpose. As faith in the ruling elite's divine connection to the rain gods faltered amidst the endless drought, that social contract broke. The knowledge of how to maintain the canals and fields remained, but the collective will and organization to do so at the necessary scale dissolved. People did not vanish. They made a rational, heartbreaking choice. They abandoned the grand stone centers, dispersing in smaller family groups to areas with more reliable water sources, like rivers or deeper lakes, or returning to a more mobile, less centralized way of life. The collapse was not an end of the Maya people, but a dramatic reorganization. It was the failure of a specific, magnificent, and highly complex urban model when the environmental and social conditions that birthed it changed beyond its design parameters. Their story stands as history's great warning about resilience. It reveals that sustainability is not a static achievement, but a continuous process of adaptation. A system, no matter how elegant, is only as strong as its ability to endure the shocks it did not foresee. Angkor's story offers a powerful counterpoint to the Maya decline. While the southern Maya lowlands faced a dramatic reorganization, the Khmer capital at Angkor demonstrated a different kind of endurance, persisting as a major urban and ceremonial center for over 500 years. Its resilience can be traced directly back to the sheer scale and redundancy of its engineered landscape. Where a Maya city might rely on a few large reservoirs, Angkor's water network was a vast, interlinked mesh. It featured not one, but several colossal Barays, along with thousands of community ponds and a fractal web of canals that could move water across an area the size of modern Los Angeles. This created multiple backup systems. If one reservoir's catchment area suffered a dry spell, water could potentially be redirected from another. The system had a built-in capacity to absorb shock, to buffer against the kind of prolonged, localized drought that could cripple a less connected city. Furthermore, the Khmer system was designed for constant dynamic management. Canals required regular dredging to maintain flow, and embankments needed reinforcement. This necessity for ongoing maintenance created a society deeply attuned to the health of its hydrological heart. The very act of sustaining the city reinforced the social structures and technical knowledge needed for its survival, forging a resilient bond between the people and their engineered environment. This allowed Angkor to weather significant climatic fluctuations, including periods of drought and intense monsoon rainfall that would have stressed lesser systems to their breaking point. Yet, even Angkor did not last forever in its classic form. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the city entered a long period of transformation. It was not a sudden, catastrophic collapse like the one often imagined for the Maya, but a gradual receding from its peak. A combination of pressures slowly altered its fate. Shifts in international trade routes began to favor maritime commerce over inland networks, diminishing Angkor's economic centrality. At the same time, the rise of powerful neighboring states introduced new political and military challenges. These social shifts coincided with growing strain on the city's magnificent infrastructure. Evidence from sediment cores suggests the hydraulic network may have begun to suffer from gradual siltation and shifts in water management, possibly linked to both environmental changes and the immense challenge of maintaining such a colossal system over centuries. The city did not vanish, instead it transformed. The focus of power and population gradually shifted southward, closer to the vital Mekong River and the growing port of Phnom Penh, adapting to new economic realities. Angkor itself was never fully abandoned. It transitioned from a living metropolis into a revered ceremonial center, its temples cared for by Buddhist monastic communities who preserved its spiritual legacy within the very landscape it had created. This story of transformation, rather than utter collapse, is perhaps the most instructive lesson. It shows that even the most brilliant human systems exist within a wider context of changing climate, economics, and politics. Resilience is not about permanence, but about the capacity to adapt, to change form, and to leave a legacy that endures in new ways. For centuries, the dense Amazon was the ultimate symbol of pristine nature. The very idea of ancient cities hidden beneath its canopy seemed like a fantasy, a romantic notion with no basis in fact. The consensus was clear: this was a green desert, a place where only small, nomadic tribes could survive, leaving no permanent mark. But technology has a way of revealing truths long buried. In recent years, a revolutionary tool has stripped away the forest's veil, and what it has shown us demands a complete rewriting of history. That tool is LIDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging. Mounted on aircraft, it fires millions of laser pulses through the smallest gaps in the canopy, mapping the ground surface beneath with centimeter precision. It is like giving archaeologists X-ray vision, and in the Amazon, this vision has revealed a lost world. Across vast stretches of the basin, particularly in regions of modern-day Bolivia and Brazil, the LIDAR maps do not show an untouched wilderness. They show geometry. They reveal an astonishing, sprawling network of human engineering. The images depict precisely aligned causeways, some stretching for dozens of miles in perfectly straight lines, connecting nodal points. They show symmetrical mounds arranged in circular or rectangular formations, the foundations of large communal buildings and plazas. They uncover complex earthworks, defensive ditches, and raised platforms for homes, all arranged in a deliberate, interconnected pattern. This is not the footprint of a few scattered villages. This is the signature of a sophisticated, regional society that sculpted the landscape on a grand scale. The scale of these discoveries is staggering. In the Llanos de Mojos region of Bolivia, researchers have identified what they call garden cities. These are not dense stone metropolises, but extensive urban networks where thousands of artificial mounds, each serving as an island home or garden plot, are linked by those straight causeways and surrounded by curving canals and fish ponds. The entire system covers an area comparable to classic civilizations elsewhere. It is a planned, hydrological landscape designed to thrive in the seasonal floods. This evidence shatters the persistent myth of a virgin Amazon. It proves that pre-Columbian societies here were not passive inhabitants of the forest, but active, ambitious engineers. They moved staggering amounts of earth to shape their environment, creating elevated terrain for living and farming in the floodplain, managing water with canals and reservoirs, and connecting their communities with a vast transportation and communication grid. These were not simple tribes, but cultures with the social organization, technical knowledge, and long-term vision to transform millions of acres. The LIDAR Revolution forces a humbling realization. We have profoundly underestimated the scale and sophistication of human innovation in the world's largest rainforest. The Amazon was not a barrier to civilization, it was a canvas for it. These geometric patterns revealed by LIDAR are not the only marks on the land. Across the southwestern Amazon, in the Brazilian state of Acre, a different kind of earthwork emerges from the forest floor. These are the geoglyphs, vast geometric designs carved into the earth, so large their shapes are only coherent from the air. They are not mounds built up, but trenches dug down, outlining perfect circles, squares, octagons, and intricate labyrinths. The scale is breathtaking, with some enclosures spanning over 300 meters across. Their ditches can be several meters wide and deep, and the soil removed was piled neatly to form clean, raised embankments along their inner edges. The sheer labor involved is monumental, representing the movement of countless tons of earth, all executed with stunning geometric precision. For what possible purpose? This question sparks a fascinating debate that cuts to the heart of understanding these societies. One compelling theory is that these were ceremonial spaces, immense outdoor temples for gatherings, rituals, and astronomical observation. Their precise shapes and alignments suggest a deep knowledge of geometry and perhaps a connection to celestial cycles, similar to the Maya causeways. They could have been spaces for community cohesion, where people from across the region gathered for seasonal festivals, forging a shared identity through shared labor and celebration. Another view points to defense. The deep ditches and raised banks could have served as fortifications, protecting a village or sacred area. Yet, many geoglyphs lack evidence of permanent settlement within them, and their intricate, often singular gateways don't always suggest a primary military function. A third idea sees them as territorial markers, giant statements of identity and control etched permanently into the landscape, visible to anyone traveling along the region's ancient causeways. But perhaps the most transformative theory links them directly to the engineered landscape we've been exploring. These earthworks may have been integral components of large-scale environmental management. The ditches themselves could have served as drainage channels in the wet season, helping to regulate water levels in the surrounding fields and forest. The excavated soil, now forming raised berms, created elevated, well-drained terrain ideal for fruit trees, crops, or even habitation. In this reading, the geoglyph is not an isolated symbol, but a functional node within a managed ecosystem, a piece of hydrological and agricultural infrastructure that also carried profound symbolic meaning. This duality is key. They likely served multiple, overlapping purposes. A ditch that defines a sacred circle also moves water. A bank that marks a territory also creates a fertile garden bed. This represents the ultimate expression of the rainforest engineer's philosophy, a complete blurring of the line between the practical and the spiritual, between shaping the earth for survival and inscribing it with meaning. These geoglyphs are a powerful statement. They tell us that these cultures did not just live in the Amazon, they were in a constant, creative dialogue with it, sculpting the very skin of the earth into forms that served the body, the community, and the cosmos all at once. This balance between human need and environmental capacity defines a truly sustainable system. We can understand their achievement best by applying a modern lens, examining the fundamental equation of any civilization, the relationship between inputs and outputs. For us today, a city is a linear machine. It consumes vast quantities of imported energy, food, and materials, and it produces equally vast quantities of waste, pollution, and degraded land. The flow is one way, a constant extraction with no plan for renewal. The rainforest civilizations engineered the opposite, a circular economy in the deepest sense. Their systems were designed to be closed loops where every output was redirected to become a valuable input, minimizing waste and external dependency. Start with the most basic human output, organic refuse. In our linear model, this is garbage to be hauled away. In their circular model, it was the foundation of fertility. Kitchen scraps, fish bones, broken pottery, and ash from cooking fires were not discarded. They were carefully incorporated into the creation of soils like Terra, Preta, transforming waste into a permanent, self-enhancing resource. This was recycling elevated to an art form, a process that turned a disposal problem into a production engine. Their primary input, water, was not pumped from distant aquifers or diverted from far-off rivers at great ecological cost. It was harvested on site, captured from the sky during the monsoon, and meticulously stored. The entire landscape became a rainwater catchment system, from the grand Barays to the plastered temple plaza to the thatched roof of a family home. This made them resilient to local climate shifts and eliminated the need for energy-intensive transport. Their food systems relied not on annual monocultures requiring constant tilling, fertilization, and replanting, but on perennial polycultures. The food forest, with its layered canopy of fruit trees, nut bushes, and medicinal vines, was a self-maintaining engine of production. It required no annual plowing that would erode topsoil. Its deep-rooted trees brought nutrients up from the subsoil. Its diversity of species prevented pest outbreaks and provided continuous harvests. The output was a steady, diverse food supply, and the input was primarily human knowledge and seasonal maintenance. Even their construction followed this principle. They built with locally abundant materials, limestone in Mesoamerica, laterite and sandstone in Southeast Asia, minimizing the energy cost of transport. When a structure served its purpose, its materials could often be repurposed, or they would simply return to the earth from which they came. This careful accounting of inputs and outputs created a balance sheet that remained in the black for centuries. They did not draw down their natural capital, they invested in it. The output of a thriving city was not a depleted landscape, but an enriched one, a managed ecosystem that was often more biodiverse and productive than the wild forest it replaced. This is the core of their forgotten blueprint, a model where human settlement does not consume its host environment, but enters into a reciprocal partnership with it. The longevity of their cities stands as a direct testament to the success of this equation, a powerful reminder that sustainability is not an abstract ideal, but a practical, achievable state of balance. This revelation forces a fundamental rethinking of a story we have long accepted. For generations, the narrative of the Americas and Southeast Asia was one of pristine, untouched wilderness, a vast, empty garden waiting to be discovered. Early European explorers arriving on these shores wrote of endless, untamed forests and seemingly vacant lands. They saw nature in its raw, unaltered state, or so they believed. But what if their eyes were witnessing not a beginning, but an ending? What they described as virgin wilderness was, in many crucial places, something profoundly different, a landscape in recovery. It was a garden that had lost its gardeners. The demographic catastrophe that followed contact was catastrophic and swift. Diseases for which indigenous populations had no immunity swept across continents with a ferocity that is difficult to fully comprehend, often preceding the actual arrival of European settlers. In some regions, scholarly estimates suggest upwards of 90% of the population perished within a century. This was not merely a loss of life, it was the collapse of an entire world of knowledge and maintenance. The intricate systems we have explored, the canals, the raised fields, the food forests, all required constant, knowledgeable care. Without the communities to dredge the silt from waterways, to prune the productive groves, to manage the water gates, these engineered landscapes began to falter. Canals silted up and became stagnant marshes. Raised fields, no longer maintained, eroded and flooded. The carefully curated food forests were gradually overtaken by faster-growing pioneer species, their orderly diversity dissolving back into a more generalized, wilder form of jungle. The landscape itself underwent a dramatic rewilding. Within a few generations, the signs of human management became subtle, hidden beneath a new layer of vigorous growth. By the time later explorers and settlers pushed inland, they encountered not the thriving, managed ecosystems of a century before, but the beautiful, tangled aftermath. They saw a forest that seemed primeval, but was in fact a monument to a profound and recent loss. This misinterpretation had lasting consequences. It fueled the idea of terra nullius, land belonging to no one, which was used to justify displacement and colonization. It erased the legacy of the civilizations that had shaped these continents for millennia, casting their descendants as primitive inhabitants of a wild land, rather than as the heirs of sophisticated environmental stewards. The myth of the pristine wilderness is therefore a double tragedy. It obscures both the scale of human achievement and the depth of human loss. It convinces us that the deep forest is nature's default state, when in many cases it is nature reclaiming a masterpiece of human design. To walk through the Amazon or the woodlands of New England today is not to walk through a place that has never known human hands. It is to walk through a living archive, a place of memory where every seemingly wild grove might whisper of an ancient orchard, and every silent swamp might hide the geometric ghost of a fruitful field. The silence left behind in the emptied gardens and untended canals was not just a silence of people, but of knowledge. With the passing of the generations who had managed these landscapes, a vast library of practical wisdom, accumulated over centuries, began to dissolve. This was not knowledge stored in scrolls or codices, but a living intelligence carried in the hands and memories of the people themselves. It was the specific understanding of which Canal Gate needed adjusting after a 3-day rain, the precise combination of charcoal and clay that made a plaster watertight for decades, the exact moment to harvest a certain root for its maximum potency. This was advanced science, but of a kind we struggle to categorize, a seamless blend of botany, hydrology, and materials engineering that existed as oral tradition, ritual practice, and muscle memory. Its loss represents one of history's great intellectual extinctions. We are left with the monumental stone outcomes, the pyramids and reservoirs, but the nuanced, day-to-day instructions for maintaining the system that supported them have largely vanished. Consider the recipe for Terra Preta, that miraculous engineered soil. Modern scientists can analyze its components, but the exact cultural process, the specific ratios and sequences of adding charcoal, pottery shards, and organic matter that transformed it from a midden heap into a self-renewing fertility engine, that knowledge faded with the communities who practiced it. We know the Maya created incredibly durable lime plasters and water-resistant cements using extracts from local trees. The formula for these ancient polymers, perfected through generations of experimentation, is a technical secret that modern materials scientists are still trying to fully reverse engineer. The loss extends to an entire pharmacopoeia of the forest. Healers would have known the properties of thousands of plants, which vine could treat a fever, which bark could soothe a burn, which leaf could purify water, knowledge that represented a profound mapping of ecological relationships. This was not superstition, it was a deep, empirical database of biodiversity and its applications, most of which was never written down. Its absence is felt not as a historical curiosity, but as a tangible gap in human potential. Today, archaeologists, botanists, and engineers are engaged in a slow, painstaking act of recovery. They are not just digging up artifacts, they are attempting to decode a lost operating manual for living sustainably within some of the planet's most demanding environments. Every soil core that shows an ancient irrigation pattern, every pollen sample that reveals a curated orchard, every LIDAR map that unveils a forgotten hydrological grid, is a fragment of that manual being pieced back together. The work is humbling, for it reveals that our current challenges of sustainability are not new, and that the solutions we seek may have already been invented, tested, and perfected long ago, only to be forgotten, waiting silently in the earth for us to rediscover their wisdom. The principles etched into these ancient landscapes are not relics of a lost world. They are a startlingly relevant blueprint for our own. We face a future defined by urban sprawl, water scarcity, and a changing climate, challenges that mirror those the rainforest engineers confronted with profound success. Their solutions point toward a different way of building, one based on resilience rather than brute force. Take water management. Our modern model is often centralized and linear. We pipe water from distant sources, use it once, and channel the waste away as quickly as possible. This creates vulnerability, a single point of failure for entire regions during drought or infrastructure strain. The ancient model was decentralized and circular. It captured water where it fell, stored it locally in a network of reservoirs and ponds, and reused it continuously within a closed loop. This principle is being rediscovered today in the form of green infrastructure. Cities are now creating bioswales along streets to capture stormwater, constructing wetlands to naturally filter runoff, and mandating rainwater harvesting for new buildings. These are not new technologies. They are modern iterations of the same idea that built Angkor's Barays and Maya aguadas, turning cities into sponges rather than impermeable funnels. Similarly, our industrial agriculture, with its vast monocultures and heavy reliance on chemical inputs, degrades soil and drains aquifers. The ancient alternative was the integrated food forest, a perennial polyculture that built soil, conserved water, and provided continuous yield. This agroforestry model is gaining urgent traction today as a method of regenerative farming, restoring degraded land, sequestering carbon, and creating food security without depleting the resource base. The lesson is not to copy their exact canals or temple mounds, but to adopt their underlying philosophy of design. It is a philosophy that sees the city not as separate from nature, but as an integrated component of its local ecosystem. It asks us to design for multiple functions where a park is also a flood basin, a street is also a water catchment, and a rooftop is also a garden. It champions redundancy, creating many small, interconnected systems instead of one massive, fragile one. Most importantly, it recognizes that long-term survival depends on enriching the environment you inhabit, not just extracting from it. These civilizations show us that sustainability is not a limitation, but a source of profound innovation and stability. Their silent, overgrown cities stand as a testament to what is possible when human ingenuity works in concert with the natural world, offering not a path back, but a way forward. This technological leap has turned a centuries-old assumption on its head. For generations, archaeologists in the rainforest faced a nearly impossible task. The density of the canopy meant that ground surveys were slow, limited, and could miss the forest for the trees. A monumental earthwork or a network of ancient roads could lie just a few dozen meters away, completely invisible beneath the green veil. The story of these places was written in fragments: a temple complex discovered here, a lone causeway found there. The prevailing narrative was one of isolated ceremonial centers, pockets of civilization scattered in a vast, untamed wild. Then came LIDAR, mounted on aircraft. This system works by sending out hundreds of thousands of laser pulses every second. These pulses penetrate the smallest gaps in the foliage, hit the ground, and bounce back. By measuring the time it takes for each pulse to return, a computer can build a staggeringly detailed, three-dimensional map of the true ground surface, digitally stripping away every single tree, bush, and vine. It is, in effect, a form of archaeological X-ray vision. The first time researchers flew a LIDAR survey over the Maya site of Caracol in Belize, the results were breathtaking. In a matter of days, the technology revealed a city far more extensive and complex than decades of groundwork had suggested. It showed not just the central temples, but the entire suburban sprawl, thousands of residential platforms, terraced agricultural fields, hidden reservoirs, and a web of causeways connecting it all. The isolated center was gone, replaced by the image of a vast, low-density metropolis, a garden city engineered into the hills. This was the paradigm shift. LIDAR did not just find new things, it changed the scale of the story. In Cambodia, surveys over Angkor revealed a similarly transformative picture. Beyond the well-known temples, the laser maps showed an astonishingly precise grid of urban blocks, canals, and community ponds organized around the major temple complexes. It revealed that Angkor was not a collection of monuments in a jungle, but a meticulously planned hydraulic city on a scale comparable to modern Los Angeles. The temples were the glittering nodes, but the genius was in the connective tissue, the engineered landscape that sustained them. Perhaps the most profound revelations have come from the Amazon basin. In regions long considered impossible for large-scale societies, LIDAR has painted a picture of staggering human intervention. In the Llanos de Mojos of Bolivia, the lasers revealed a lost landscape of geometric earthworks, symmetrical mounds arranged in precise circular and rectangular formations, linked by straight, raised causeways that run for dozens of miles. These are not random features, they are the signatures of a sophisticated society that sculpted millions of acres of floodplain into a habitable, productive, and interconnected world. The technology has effectively ended the debate about a pristine Amazon. It shows us with undeniable clarity that what we called wilderness was often a carefully managed garden, its human architects invisible to us until we learn to see with new eyes. LIDAR has given us the first complete blueprints of these lost civilizations, revealing that their true monument was not any single pyramid, but the entire, intelligently designed landscape upon which it stood. The true portrait of these places is no longer painted by archaeology alone. It emerges from a remarkable conversation between disciplines, a synthesis of data that transforms silent ruins back into living, breathing worlds. To understand a Maya city or an Amazonian earthwork today, scientists must think like the engineers who built them, blending the language of stones with the story of soil, water, and pollen. This is where the new story is being written, not in the dust of excavation, but in the crossfire of data streams from once separate fields. Paleobotanists who study ancient plant remains analyze microscopic pollen grains preserved in lake beds and reservoir sediments. These tiny time capsules tell us what was growing in the landscape century by century. A sudden spike in maize pollen near a reservoir signals intensive agriculture. A decline in forest tree pollen and a rise in plants associated with open fields or orchards reveals where the jungle was cleared and managed. This data allows us to map the ancient garden city, to see where the food forests began and the wild jungle ended. Soil scientists, meanwhile, examine the very earth. They take cores from ancient field systems, analyzing chemistry and texture to understand fertility management. They can identify the layers of charcoal and organic matter that define human-made soils like Terra Preta, distinguishing them from the natural, nutrient-poor earth around them. This tells us not just that people farmed here, but how they engineered the land to remain productive for generations. Climatologists add the dimension of time and weather. By studying stalagmites in caves or layers in ice cores, they reconstruct rainfall patterns and temperature shifts over millennia. They can pinpoint decades of severe drought that would have stressed a water-dependent society, or periods of reliable monsoon that allowed for expansion. This data provides the environmental stage upon which the human drama unfolded, showing us the pressures and opportunities these civilizations faced. Finally, hydrologists model the flow of water. Using LIDAR terrain data, they can simulate how ancient canals would have functioned, where water would pool during floods, and how reservoirs would have filled and drained. This turns a static map of ditches and basins into a dynamic model of a working system. When you combine these threads, the picture changes completely. A collection of temple mounds is no longer just a ceremonial center. It becomes the heart of a socio-ecological system. The temple itself is a hydrological feature, its plaza a catchment area. The surrounding forest was a curated source of food and medicine. The reservoir below was a managed fishery and irrigation source, its health monitored by the pollen falling into its waters. The entire arrangement was a calibrated response to the rainfall patterns deciphered from cave formations. This interdisciplinary synthesis reveals these sites not as dead ruins, but as fossilized intelligence. They are the skeletal remains of a complex organism, a unified system where society, religion, economy, and ecology were inseparable parts of a single, resilient whole. We are no longer just studying what they built, we are beginning to understand how they thought, how they saw their place within a living world, and how they designed their lives to be a sustaining part of it. Even with our new tools, the past resists simple answers. These rediscovered civilizations are not static exhibits in a museum, but vibrant fields of inquiry, where every discovery sparks new debates among researchers. The grand reservoirs of Angkor, for instance, stand at the center of a fundamental question. Were these colossal Barays primarily practical water tanks, or were they first and foremost symbolic oceans, representations of the Hindu cosmic sea? The evidence compellingly supports both views. Their sheer scale and engineering precision undeniably provided irrigation, flood control, and a stable water supply for hundreds of thousands. Yet their perfect geometric form, their alignment with temples, and their placement within a sacred cosmology suggest their meaning was as profound as their function. The most likely truth is that this duality was the point. The reservoirs worked because they were sacred, and they were sacred because they worked. The king's power was demonstrated not just by commanding labor, but by performing the godlike act of creating a sea, thereby guaranteeing the kingdom's literal and spiritual sustenance. This fusion of utility and belief is what made the system so resilient for so long, and it challenges our modern tendency to separate practical engineering from symbolic thought. Another lively debate simmers in the rich, dark soils of the Amazon. Was Terra Preta, that miraculous self-renewing earth, a deliberate invention or a fortunate accident? Some archaeologists see the consistent recipe of charcoal, pottery, and organic waste as clear evidence of intentional soil science, a technology developed and passed down through generations to conquer the rainforest's poor fertility. Others propose it accumulated gradually over centuries from daily living, a beneficial byproduct of settlement that communities then learned to recognize and exploit. The answer likely lies somewhere in between, a beautiful example of how practical knowledge evolves. An initial observation that certain midden areas grew better crops could have led to conscious replication and refinement. This debate matters because it changes how we view these societies. Were they conscious planetary engineers or exceptionally keen observers who nurtured emergent properties in their environment? Either interpretation reveals a profound sophistication, a partnership with natural processes that created lasting abundance. Estimating the populations these engineered landscapes could support is another area of shifting consensus. Earlier, conservative guesses are being radically revised upward by LIDAR and settlement pattern studies. The sprawling, low-density garden cities of the Maya and the vast hydraulic urban network of Angkor suggest populations in the hundreds of thousands, even over 1 million for Greater Angkor at its peak. These were not small ceremonial hubs, but some of the most populous urban centers of the ancient world. This realization forces us to recalibrate our understanding of their agricultural output. The productivity of raised field systems, perennial agroforestry, and managed wetlands was far greater than traditional models of slash and burn could ever allow. The landscape itself was a continuous, renewable harvest. Finally, the question of why these systems eventually transformed or declined remains a complex puzzle with no single key. The story is no longer a simple tale of ecological suicide or mysterious vanishment. For the classic Maya, the evidence points to a confluence of stresses, a perfect storm where prolonged drought strained the water systems, while political fragmentation and conflict undermined the social cohesion needed to adapt them. It was a failure of resilience, where environmental shock exposed vulnerabilities in the social and political fabric. Angkor's story is one of longer resilience followed by a gradual transformation, where shifting trade patterns, geopolitical pressures, and possibly cumulative strain on the hydraulic network led to a strategic reorientation of the kingdom's center of gravity. In both cases, the lesson is that sustainability is not a permanent state, but a dynamic balance between a society's design, its environment, and its ability to manage change. These ongoing debates are not signs of confusion, but of a healthy, vibrant field. They remind us that history is not a closed book, but a conversation we are still having with the ingenuity of those who came before. A dialogue that continues to reshape our understanding of what is possible. The silent stones and enriched soils they left behind are not just relics of a forgotten age, they are a testament to a different kind of time. Their legacy is not measured in centuries of continuous empire, but in the enduring mark of a sustainable idea. When we look at the cracked plaster of a Maya reservoir or the still straight embankment of an Angkorian Baray, we are seeing more than abandoned engineering. We are witnessing the physical proof of a philosophy, a way of being in the world that understood durability as a partnership. These civilizations achieved what we often struggle to conceive. They built flourishing, complex societies that were woven into the fabric of their environment, not stamped upon it. Their monuments were not declarations of conquest over nature, but of collaboration with it. The pyramid was an extension of the mountain, the reservoir a mirror of the celestial sea, the food forest a respectful echo of the wild jungle. This integrated worldview was their greatest innovation. It meant that every act of construction, from digging a canal to planting a tree, served multiple purposes, practical, spiritual, and ecological, all at once. The legacy they left is therefore twofold. First, there is the tangible evidence, the cities and fields that whisper of a lost science of living well. Second, and perhaps more crucial, is the intellectual legacy, the demonstration that human ingenuity is most powerful when it listens to the world it seeks to inhabit. They did not have our technology, but they possessed a depth of place-based knowledge we are only beginning to recover. They remind us that resilience is not about building higher walls against a changing climate, but about designing flexible systems that can absorb change, systems where water is a cherished resource to be cycled, not a waste product to be expelled, where soil is a living capital to be enriched, not a sterile medium to be exploited. Their story concludes not with a mysterious ending, but with a clear, if challenging, invitation. It asks us to reconsider the very purpose of a city. Is it a machine for consumption, or can it be, as they proved, an organism in balance, a garden that nurtures its inhabitants and is nurtured by them in return? The stones and the soil hold the blueprint not for recreating the past, but for reimagining our future. The ultimate lesson from these lost cities is not a list of ancient techniques, but a fundamental shift in perspective. They achieved what they did because they never saw a division between the built environment and the living one. Their urban centers were biological and hydrological machines as much as political and religious ones. Every temple was a water catchment, every causeway a celestial calendar, every home garden a piece of a managed forest. This was not architecture placed upon the land. It was architecture grown from it, a philosophy of integration where human intention worked within the rules and rhythms of the ecosystem. For them, sustainability was not a separate goal. It was the inherent logic of their design, the only way a city could hope to endure in such a demanding world. This integrated thinking holds profound relevance for our own future. We face challenges of climate volatility, resource scarcity, and urban sprawl that echo the pressures they mastered. Their legacy suggests that our path forward may not lie in more advanced technology alone, but in a more sophisticated relationship with our local environments. It invites us to ask, what if our cities were designed as active participants in their watersheds? What if our neighborhoods functioned as productive food forests? What if we measured a building's success not just by its cost, but by its ability to enrich the air, water, and soil around it? The rediscovery of these civilizations is more than an archaeological triumph. It is a gift of imagination from the past. It offers a proven blueprint for resilience, a demonstration that human flourishing and ecological health are not opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin. Their story encourages us to look at our own landscapes with new eyes, to see the potential for partnership in every park, rooftop, and street. To continue this exploration, we have linked further reading and documentaries in the description below. Consider how these ancient lessons might reshape your view of the place you call home, and what it means to build a world meant to last.